If you opened your fridge right now and looked at last night's leftovers, would you actually know what's happening inside that container? Not what it looks like, not what it smells like. What's happening at a chemical level, invisible to your eyes, that could be quietly working against your health every single time you hit reheat. Here's a number that might stop you mid-scroll. Diet-related factors are now considered one of the largest modifiable contributors to cancer risk worldwide, second only to tobacco use, according to major cancer research organizations. That's not a scare tactic. That's a documented public health reality. And a big piece of that puzzle isn't just what we eat, it's how we store it and how we bring it back to life on the stove or in the microwave. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly which 4 everyday foods carry hidden risks when reheated, why each one behaves the way it does, and, most importantly, the simple, practical fix for every single one. No fear-mongering, no supplements to sell you, just real food science, explained in a way that actually makes sense so you can walk into your kitchen tonight and make one small change that protects you for years. Here's the quick preview, so you know exactly what's coming. Rice hides a bacterial problem that heat alone can't fix. Chicken changes at a molecular level when it's blasted with heat twice. Leafy greens like spinach undergo a chemical conversion in your fridge that most people have never heard of. And the fourth one, eggs, is the one that catches even health-conscious people off guard because almost nobody talks about it. Stick around, because that last one might change how you meal prep breakfast forever. Let's start with the foundation, because you need this to understand everything else. Cooking food isn't a one-time chemical event. It's the beginning of an ongoing process. The first time you cook something, heat transforms proteins, sugars, and fats in fairly predictable ways. That's normal, expected, and generally not something to worry about. But food doesn't just stop changing once it leaves the stove. It keeps changing while it sits in your fridge. And when you reheat it, you're essentially restarting a chemical reaction on ingredients that are no longer in their original state. 3 things tend to happen, and once you understand them, you'll start noticing them in almost every food category we talk about today. The first is oxidation. Fats and proteins exposed to air during storage slowly become unstable. Add heat again, and that instability accelerates, breaking those molecules down further. The second involves browning reactions, the same chemistry responsible for the delicious color and flavor of a seared steak or toasted bread. Do it once, and it's just flavor. Do it repeatedly at high heat, and it can generate compounds linked to inflammation in the body. The third is specific to certain vegetables. Naturally occurring compounds called nitrates can be converted into different compounds during storage, and reheating can push that conversion further along. Keep those 3 ideas in your back pocket: oxidation, repeated high heat browning, and nitrate conversion, because you'll see them show up again and again as we go food by food. Let's talk about rice first, because almost every household on the planet reheats it. Rice is the single most consumed staple food on Earth. Billions of people eat it daily, and a huge percentage of that rice isn't eaten fresh. It's cooked once, stored, and reheated later, sometimes more than once. It's convenient, it's practical, and it's also where one of the most well-documented food safety issues in the world quietly lives. Raw rice naturally carries spores of a bacterium called Bacillus cereus. This isn't some obscure contaminant. It's practically everywhere rice is grown. Cooking kills most active bacteria, but these particular spores can survive the boiling process. If cooked rice is then left out at room temperature or stored for an extended period, those surviving spores can germinate and multiply, producing toxins as a byproduct. Here's the part that surprises people. Reheating the rice thoroughly kills the bacteria itself, but it does not destroy the toxins those bacteria already produced. Some of these toxins are remarkably heat stable, meaning they can survive cooking temperatures that would kill almost anything else. You end up eating rice that looks perfectly fine, smells perfectly fine, and tastes perfectly fine, while still containing a toxin your stove never touched. The most immediate consequence of this is food poisoning, nausea, vomiting, digestive distress, sometimes within a few hours of eating. It's actually common enough that food safety agencies have a name for it: fried rice syndrome, because it so often shows up in restaurant rice dishes that were cooked once and reheated later, sometimes after sitting out far too long. So what's the fix? It's refreshingly simple, and it has nothing to do with your microwave settings. The real danger window is the time between cooking and refrigeration. If you cook rice and then let it sit on the counter for hours before putting it away, you're giving those bacteria the perfect window to multiply. The solution: cool rice quickly. Ideally within an hour of cooking, get it into the fridge promptly, eat it within a couple of days, and avoid reheating the same batch more than once. Spreading rice out on a wide, shallow tray instead of leaving it in a deep pot helps it cool faster, which matters more than people realize. That's rice. Straightforward once you know the mechanism, and completely preventable with one small habit change. But here's where it gets more interesting. Because the next food on this list is something almost every fitness-conscious, protein-focused eater considers a completely safe, foolproof choice. And the reason it's not as simple as you think has to do with what happens to protein itself when it's exposed to high heat not once, but twice. Before we get there, I want you to sit with something for a second. None of what we've covered so far, and none of what's coming, is about being afraid of food. Rice is still one of the most important staple foods on the planet, feeding billions of people safely every single day. This isn't about avoiding rice. It's about understanding the small handful of storage habits that make the difference between a food that nourishes you and one that quietly works against you. That distinction matters, because the next 3 foods on this list follow the exact same pattern. A food that is fundamentally healthy, recommended by nutrition experts everywhere, that becomes a different story, only because of how it's stored and brought back to temperature. So here's your open question heading into the next part. If a lean, doctor-recommended protein like chicken can undergo a measurable chemical change just from being reheated at high temperatures, what does that actually mean for the mountains of meal-prepped chicken sitting in refrigerators around the world right now? And more importantly, is there a way to still enjoy your leftovers without giving up the convenience that makes meal prep worth doing in the first place? That's exactly where we're headed next. Plus the vegetable that health experts practically beg you to eat more of, and the everyday breakfast food that almost nobody realizes has a reheating problem at all. Stay with me, because the next section is going to change how you think about your fridge. Let's pick up right where we left off, with chicken, the food that shows up in more meal prep containers than almost anything else on Earth. Here's the thing about chicken. It deserves its reputation. Lean, high in protein, low in saturated fat compared to red meat. There's a reason dietitians build entire meal plans around it. The issue isn't the chicken itself. It's what happens when protein-rich foods are exposed to high, direct heat, especially more than once. When meat is cooked at high temperatures, think grilling, pan-searing, or blasting it in a microwave until it's practically dried out, a group of compounds called heterocyclic amines can form. These aren't exotic or rare. They've been studied extensively for decades, and they're formed anytime muscle protein hits high heat, whether that's the first cook or a second round in the microwave. Research has associated higher long-term intake of these compounds with increased risk for certain digestive cancers, which is part of why nutrition researchers keep an eye on cooking methods, not just ingredients. Here's what makes this relevant to your leftovers specifically. Reheating already cooked chicken at very high heat, especially in ways that dry it out or char the edges, adds another round of that same high heat exposure on top of the first. It's less about reheating equals danger and more about repeated high heat cooking, however it happens, is the actual variable worth managing. And this is exactly why the fix isn't stop eating chicken. It's change how you bring it back to temperature. Here's what actually works. Reheat chicken gently, using lower heat over a longer period rather than blasting it on high for speed. A covered dish in a moderate oven or a lower microwave power setting with a splash of water to keep it from drying out does the job without pushing the meat through another aggressive high heat cycle. Even better, if the chicken is well seasoned and moist, plenty of people simply eat it cold, straight out of the fridge in a salad or wrap. No reheating needed at all, and you skip the whole conversation. One more practical note. The internal temperature matters more than the cooking method. You want your chicken reaching a safe serving temperature without excessive prolonged high heat. A simple food thermometer solves this more reliably than guessing based on how hot the microwave feels. Now let's shift gears completely, because the next food on our list might be the most surprising one yet. Not because it's unhealthy, but because it's the opposite. It's a food that nutritionists, cardiologists, and pretty much every Eat More Vegetables campaign in existence actively pushes people toward. Spinach and its leafy green relatives like Swiss chard, beet greens, and celery. Spinach is nutritional royalty. Iron, folate, magnesium, a long list of antioxidants. There's a reason it shows up on every superfood list ever written. And none of that changes with what we're about to discuss. The issue isn't spinach as a food, it's a specific chemical shift that happens to certain vegetables after they've been cooked, stored, and then brought back out for round 2. Spinach and several other leafy greens are naturally high in compounds called nitrates. On their own, in fresh or freshly cooked form, these nitrates are actually beneficial. Some research even links them to healthier blood pressure. The complication starts after cooking, once the spinach sits in the fridge. Naturally occurring bacteria on the surface of the leaves can gradually convert those nitrates into nitrites. This is a well-documented chemical process, and it's exactly why food safety agencies in several countries, including guidance you'll find from European food safety authorities, specifically advise against repeatedly reheating cooked spinach, particularly recommendations aimed at protecting infants and young children, who are more sensitive to nitrite exposure than adults. For adults, the bigger long-term question researchers have looked at is what happens when those nitrites are exposed to heat again. potentially forming a different class of compounds that some studies have associated with increased cancer risk when consumed in significant quantities over long periods, similar to the reasoning behind health guidance around processed, nitrate-cured meats. To be clear, this is an active area of research, and the strength of evidence for leafy greens specifically is nowhere near as strong as it is for cured meats. But the underlying chemistry is well established enough that food safety bodies recommend caution. So what's the actual takeaway here? It's refreshingly simple. Cook your greens fresh as often as you can and eat them the same day. If you do have leftovers, the safest approach is to enjoy them cold. Spinach makes a great cold salad ingredient rather than storing them with the intention of reheating later. If you must store cooked greens, keep the window short. A few hours in an airtight container eaten cold rather than sitting overnight and reheated the next day. That's the irony worth sitting with for a second. One of the most universally recommended vegetables on the planet has a storage quirk that almost nobody talks about, simply because eat more greens is such a strong, simple message that the nuance gets lost along the way. Now here's where we get to the food I promised would surprise you the most, because unlike rice, chicken, or spinach, this one doesn't come with an obvious warning sign. It's something dietitians recommend constantly, something that shows up in almost every healthy breakfast article ever written, and something that gets meal prepped by the dozen every single Sunday. Eggs. Let's give credit where it's due first. Eggs are genuinely one of the most nutritionally complete foods available. All 9 essential amino acids, choline for brain function, selenium for antioxidant support, plus lutein and zeaxanthin for eye health. If you're building a healthy diet, eggs earn their spot. But here's the part almost nobody discusses. Eggs carry a meaningful amount of fat, concentrated mostly in the yolk, and a portion of that fat is cholesterol. When eggs are cooked the first time, that fat undergoes some initial oxidation, completely normal, nothing concerning on its own. The question researchers have been more interested in is what happens when that already oxidized fat gets exposed to high heat, again during a second round of cooking, particularly fast, high-intensity reheating like a microwave on full power. Under those conditions, cholesterol in the yolk can form oxidized derivatives, sometimes called oxystrols. This has become a genuine area of scientific interest over the past decade, with some laboratory research suggesting these compounds may have inflammatory or cell-stressing effects. It's worth being honest about where the science currently stands. This is an emerging research area, not a settled, high-confidence causal link to cancer in humans. But it's exactly the kind of finding that justifies a simple precaution rather than ignoring it entirely. There's a second, more practical issue too. Reheated eggs, especially scrambled eggs blasted in a microwave, tend to develop a rubbery, overcooked texture because the proteins denature further with each round of heat. That's not a cancer conversation at all. It's just a your eggs will taste worse conversation. But it's a good reminder that eggs, more than most foods, really are best enjoyed fresh. So we've now covered all 4 foods and the specific mechanism behind each one. But knowing the why is only half the picture. The real value is in what you actually do differently starting tonight. And that's exactly where we're headed next. A complete, practical game plan for handling every one of these foods without giving up convenience, without throwing away your meal prep routine, and without living in fear of your own fridge. Let's bring this all together, because at this point you've got 4 different foods and 4 different mechanisms floating around in your head, and what actually matters is turning that into something simple enough to use tonight. Here's the full picture, side by side. Rice carries a bacterial risk, not the heat itself is dangerous risk. The bacteria responsible can survive initial cooking as spores, and if the rice sits out too long before refrigeration, those spores multiply and produce heat-stable toxins that survive reheating. The fix has nothing to do with your microwave and everything to do with timing. Cool it fast, refrigerate promptly, eat it within a couple of days, and don't reheat the same batch more than once. Chicken isn't dangerous because it's chicken. It's about repeated exposure to high, direct heat. The same chemistry involved whenever any protein is cooked aggressively more than once. The fix: reheat gently using lower heat over more time, rather than blasting it on high just to save 30 seconds. Or better yet, eat it cold in a salad or wrap, which sidesteps the whole issue. Spinach and other nitrate-rich greens undergo a chemical shift during storage that converts naturally beneficial nitrates into nitrites, and reheating can push that conversion further. The fix: eat greens fresh whenever you can, and if you have leftovers, keep them cold and consume them within a few hours, rather than storing them overnight for a second reheating. Eggs, the one nobody expects, involve oxidation of yolk fat and cholesterol that can intensify with a second round of high heat, an area researchers are still actively studying. The fix: enjoy eggs fresh, store hard-boiled eggs unpeeled, and eat them cold. And if you do need to warm up an egg dish, use gentle, indirect heat rather than a microwave on full blast. Notice the pattern running through every single one of these. None of the fixes require you to give up rice, chicken, spinach, or eggs. None of them require special equipment or a drastic diet overhaul. Every single solution comes down to two things: managing the time food spends between cooking and refrigeration, and choosing gentler reheating methods over fast, high-intensity ones. If you want the single highest impact habit out of everything we've covered today, it's this: get your leftovers into the fridge faster. Most of the risk in this entire conversation, across all four foods, traces back to food sitting at room temperature longer than it should, giving bacteria time to multiply or chemical reactions more time to progress. Spreading food out on a wide, shallow container instead of leaving it in a deep pot speeds up cooling dramatically, and that one small habit does more heavy lifting than almost anything else on this list. Second highest impact habit: invest in a cheap food thermometer if you don't already have one. Guessing whether your reheated chicken or rice has hit a safe temperature is exactly how people either overheat food into oblivion or underheat it and leave bacteria intact. A $5 thermometer removes the guesswork entirely. And third, genuinely underrated, just cook smaller batches more often. A huge percentage of the reheating conversation exists purely because people cook in bulk to save time, which is completely reasonable, but it does mean more food spends more time sitting in storage before it's eaten. If your schedule allows it, cooking rice, chicken, or eggs in smaller, more frequent batches simply reduces how much reheating you're doing in the first place. None of this is about fear. It's about closing a gap that exists purely because most of us were never taught this stuff. Nobody sits you down as a kid and explains the difference between reheating rice safely versus unsafely. It's not exactly dinner table conversation, but it should be, because these are some of the most commonly eaten foods on the planet, and the fixes are almost embarrassingly simple once you actually know them. Think about who in your life reheats leftovers on autopilot. A roommate who lives on meal-prepped chicken and rice, a parent who always has hard-boiled eggs in the fridge, a partner who microwaves last night's spinach without a second thought. None of them are doing anything wrong. They just haven't come across this information yet, and now you have a genuinely useful 2-minute way to pass it along without lecturing anyone. Just send them this video. Before we wrap up, I'd love to know, out of the 4 foods we covered today, which one caught you off guard the most? Was it the eggs, since almost nobody expects that one? Or was it chicken, considering how often it gets held up as the safe, healthy go-to protein? Drop it in the comments. I read all of them, and honestly, they shape what gets covered in future videos. And if this kind of practical, evidence-informed content is useful to you, hitting subscribe means you won't miss the next one, because there's a lot more everyday food science worth unpacking, and we're just getting started. One last thing before you go: nothing in this video is meant to replace personalized medical or nutritional advice. Food science is a constantly evolving field, and if you have specific health concerns, especially anything related to existing medical conditions, it's always worth checking in with a doctor or registered dietitian who knows your individual situation. Thanks for sticking with me through this one. Now go clear out that fridge with a little more confidence than you walked in with.